What's up, fam? It's your girl Naia, and today we're diving into something that's about to blow your mind. We're checking out the biggest lie in video games from Aya, and trust me, it's gonna be a wild ride. I mean, who doesn't love a good gaming scandal, right? Get ready for some jaw-dropping moments, a sprinkle of my signature humor, and maybe a few wait-what reactions along the way. If you're as hyped as I am, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Let's jump right into it and uncover these gaming secrets together.
What does every one of these? This is my butter and cheese sandwich from lunch. Now I know you're probably thinking one of two things. Either, no, you're wrong, you stupid unicorn, that is water, or...
That line is hilarious. Calling someone a stupid unicorn is such a wild way to make a point. It really adds a fun twist to the conversation.
Or, because you know this is about video games, of course that's not literally water. And you'd be right. But what if I told you there is a way to have water in video games? Think of your top 3 games of all time. Chances are water plays a critical role in at least one of them. I've been making a witch-themed RPG, and water is really important because it's an open-world game.
That sounds super interesting. A witch-themed prog with an open world? Water being a key element is such a cool twist. It really adds depth to the gameplay.
So it's really important for me to get right. For the past 6 months, I've been researching how thousands of other games use water and discovered the crazy lengths game devs go to in order to trick you into believing that the water is real. And trust me, it goes much deeper than you'd think. But first, let's talk about why games lie to you about water. In order to have true water, games would have to simulate water particles.
That's a solid point. Simulating water particles is no joke. It's super complex and resource intensive. It's wild how much goes into making water look real in games.
There is technology that does. The alternative is to fake it, which game developers have gotten really good at.
Faking it is such a clever move. Game developers really know how to create the illusion of water without all the heavy lifting. It's fascinating to see the tricks they use.
The earliest games had limited color palettes and resolutions, so players had to rely on their imagination for water. Today's graphics are so convincing that you can be fully immersed in an experience. Now they can handle stuff like transparency, reflection, and normal maps. Most of the impressive water effects we see in games come from the clever use of math and textures. This combination creates water that looks real, with waves and ripples that move and change.
That's a great breakdown. The way math and textures come together to create realistic water effects is mind-blowing. It really enhances the immersion in games.
Change just like a description. In short, with the help of really smart people like this Gershner guy, we've gotten really good at mathing waves. But the first mathing of waves had to start somewhere. This is WaveRay 64. I know it doesn't look great by modern standards, but it used an innovative vertex displacement strategy.
WaveRay 64 was a game changer back in the day. Even if it looks dated now, that vertex displacement was groundbreaking for its time. It really pushed the boundaries of what water effects could be in gaming.
Displacement strategy to create the waves. This meant that players could interact with the water on their jet skis. For performance, 9 separate tiles followed the player around. The tile centered on the player has the highest vertex density to create the best waves, while the outer tiles have fewer vertexes and just help keep up a convincing water effect. This strategy was so effective that it's still used in modern games nearly 30 years later. I used the same strategy in my game, and it works well.
That's awesome. Using a classic strategy like that shows how effective it can be. It's cool to see how game development techniques evolve, but still hold up over time.
It just has modern, but there is a challenge. As water in games gets better, players naturally want to interact with it more. When the highly anticipated Cyberpunk 2077 was released without bullet interactions,
that was a huge letdown for many players. With all the hype around Cyberpunk 2077, not having basic interactions like bullet impacts in water felt like a missed opportunity. It's wild how expectations have evolved.
which were present in older games like Half-Life 2, people were upset. Games like Red Dead Redemption 2 tie surface interactions into the vertex displacement strategy we talked about earlier to create ripples. With the addition of water splash sprites, the resulting effect is pretty convincing. Other games, especially older ones, do water effects all through sprites. In the game I'm developing, I decided to do a mix of both. Building on
That sounds like a smart approach. Mixing techniques can really enhance the water effects and make the gameplay feel more dynamic. Plus, it gives you the flexibility to create something unique.
Building on this, so far we've just talked about the water surface. For some games, that's where it stops, and water simply is a barrier or obstacle that's not meant to be traversed or even serves as a border. In the original Dark Souls, Mirror's Edge, and Assassin's Creed, entering water instantly.
Those games really nailed the dramatic effect of entering water. The instant death mechanic adds so much tension and makes players think twice about their actions. It's a classic way to handle water in gaming.
Instantly kills you. I thought this would fit well with my games since witches and water stereotypically don't mix. But as many of you pointed out, I shouldn't enable stereotypes. Next line.
That's a great insight. Challenging stereotypes can lead to more creative and engaging gameplay. Plus, it opens up new possibilities for how witches interact with water in your game.
Logical progression is for games to implement surface level swimming, but there are a few games that stand out as a kind of in-between here that are totally worth mentioning. The main character in Death Stranded is bogged down with heavy equipment, so it makes sense that
Death Stranding really nailed the struggle of traversing water with heavy gear. It adds a layer of realism and challenge that makes the gameplay so engaging. Plus, it fits perfectly with the game's themes of isolation and survival.
that he can't swim, but the developers didn't shy away from giving him the ability to lay on his back and flap his.
That's such a funny mechanic. It's a clever way to let players navigate water without breaking the realism. Plus, it adds a bit of humor to the struggle.
Flap his arms around like a little otter. Similarly, the main character in Red Dead Redemption can't swim. In the first game, he instantly dies when he touches water, but in the second, he at least attempts to swim and flails around. I certainly appreciate that much more than Amazon trying to convince me that this is a.
That's a solid point. It's way more immersive when characters actually attempt to swim rather than just sinking like a rock. It adds a layer of realism that players really appreciate.
Is a part of New World's lore. More commonly, games at least allow the player to swim along the top of the water. While Assassin's Creed didn't have swimming, Assassin's Creed 2 did have surface level swimming and hiding. Similarly, Hogwarts Legacy allows the player to swim along the surface and press a button to dive for objectives. From a developer standpoint, not providing an underwater view limits the work required for the project while also giving the player a more meaningful way to interact with the water.
That's a smart design choice. Limiting underwater views can save on resources while still allowing players to engage with water in a meaningful way. It strikes a good balance between gameplay and development efficiency.
Water. Not only do underwater areas vastly increase the amount of models needed, it also creates the expectation that there is something to do. I've admittedly spent an embarrassing amount of time swimming around the water in GTA 5, searching for some hidden chest or item that didn't exist. Was it a letdown? Sure. But I'm at least much more forgiving than some of the people who leave Steam reviews. But
that's a relatable take. It's interesting how passionate players can get about water mechanics in games. Sometimes the experience can be more about the journey than the destination, even if there's nothing to find.
But the examples of surface level swimming that we just looked at are in pretty calm waters. What if we're in open seas? Then we have to think a little bit more about buoyancy.
Descubra as ofertas da Black Friday da Amazon.
If we want to align the player to the surface of a wave, we just have to sample the vertexes of the water mesh and then align the player's height to the water surface. This obviously extends to any objects you want to have floating in the water too. Add a little roll to the object and you've got yourself another lie. Boy!
That's a clever way to create realism. Adding a roll to floating objects really enhances the immersion and makes the water feel alive. It's all about those little details that sell the experience.
Buoyancy. The way I implemented swimming into my game is if the player is near the surface of the water and looking at or above the horizon, they'll stay aligned to the surface. If they look below the horizon, then they'll take a dive into what's below. This is where any nightmares you have about difficult water levels comes in. From a visual standpoint, the important thing to create a convincing underwater effect is
that underwater effect looks stunning. Creating a convincing atmosphere is key to making players feel immersed. It's all about those visuals that can either enhance or ruin the experience.
Effect is fog and blip. In video games, we don't have the luxury of pre-rendering.
That's a crucial point. Real-time rendering is a whole different beast, and it really challenges developers to find efficient ways to create stunning visuals without sacrificing performance. It's all about that balance.
Pre-rendering. Instead, considering the time difference between rendering both.
That's a fascinating comparison. It's impressive how much can be achieved with clever techniques like gobos, especially when time and resources are limited. It really shows the creativity in game development.
Game devs use something similar with textures to create caustics. All we need is to cast two tiling caustic textures onto the ground and have them emit light. You can use a black and white image to do this, or the one I'm using has offset red, green, and blue channels. This just gives it a more chromatic aberration kind of effect. Simply by scrolling the two textures in opposite directions, we can achieve a convincing caustic effect. If you can pick out a specific shape, you might be able to unravel the illusion.
That's a clever observation. It's wild how easily the illusion can break if players notice specific patterns. It really highlights the importance of subtlety in visual effects.
The illusion becomes much more obvious when we increase the brightness. Subtlety is our friend here, and now we have created yet another lie. But seriously, caustics do have a big impact. Just look at the difference in feel when the game does and doesn't have caustics. Now it's time to really dig into those nightmares. I'm talking about traumatic underwater gameplay experiences. The first thing that comes to my mind is playing Zelda Ocarina of Time. Don't get me
Ocarina of Time definitely had some intense underwater moments. The pressure of running out of air while exploring those dungeons really added to the tension. It's a classic example of how underwater gameplay can be both beautiful and nerve-wracking.
Don't get me wrong, I love this game, but I also vividly remember dying in the water temple over and over. I think the issue in most cases is that developers naturally want to add breath, and doing so basically adds a timer to any underwater task. I say that as I've already made a breathing mechanic in my game. I think the key here is that the blue breath bar and purple energy bar are both tied to the...
That's an interesting approach. Tying the breath and energy mechanics together can create a unique dynamic for gameplay. It adds a layer of strategy, making players think about resource management while exploring underwater.
Tied to the player's stamina stat, which can be increased with a skill point each level. I wanted to add this because I thought it would open up the opportunity to add potions, items, or abilities the player can work towards if they want to explore the oceans. A really cool water effect I've seen used more frequently is called split view. It's where the player can see both above and below water at the same time. The first time I saw this effect was in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. No, not that one. This one.
That's a classic moment. The split view effect in Modern Warfare 2 was such a game changer for underwater gameplay. It really enhances immersion by allowing players to see both environments simultaneously.
This one. How do you have a numbering system for your games and end up using the same number twice? Anyway, the effect absolutely blows me away. The player coming out of the water even has these water droplets, and diving in, you can see a burst of bubbles that just make it look so realistic. There's another game called Subside that is currently in development that does an incredible job at this effect too. The first time I saw it, I literally thought it was a video. So naturally, I added the effect to my game too.
That's awesome. Adding such a realistic effect can really elevate the visual experience in your game. It's great to see how inspiration from other titles can lead to unique enhancements in your own work.
It certainly pales in comparison to the other two examples, but it's my favorite water effect in video games by far. An interesting challenge I had with this though was my game is in third person. The two previous examples were both in first person. I don't think it's a problem visually, the underwater effects just show when the camera is underwater, not the player. Something felt off with the sound for a while though. I couldn't quite put my finger on it.
It's interesting how sound can significantly impact the underwater experience. Getting that audio right is crucial for immersion, and it can be tricky to balance with visuals. It sounds like you're really fine-tuning the details.
There was a splash. You wouldn't imagine how many different ways a splash can sound and how having the wrong...
That's a great point. The sound design for splashes can really change the feel of a scene. It's amazing how much detail goes into creating an immersive experience, and the right audio can make all the difference.
The wrong one makes something feel off. Look, here's what it sounds like when I jump into the water in Subnautica. Now, here's what it sounds like when I use a different splash sound. Weird, right? And when you're underwater, things should sound like you're underwater. Instead of making new sounds, I just applied some low and high pass filters and a little bit of reverb to the audio.
That's a smart approach. Using filters and reverb can really enhance the underwater audio experience without needing to create entirely new sounds. It's all about those subtle adjustments that make a big difference.
I know there are some people excited about the possibility of fluid simulation in games, but I think realistically, developers have just gotten so good at faking it that they just don't need it. Access to high-quality water tools has never been better. During my research, I found this water asset for Unreal that looks absolutely incredible. I'm excited to see what devs are able to create with assets like this.
That water asset looks stunning. It's amazing how realistic graphics have become, and I can't wait to see the creative ways developers will use such high-quality assets in their games. It really opens up new possibilities for immersive environments.
Sure, it's especially if this is the quality difference we're talking about. Using these tricks, I was able to transform the water in my game from looking like this to looking like this. I don't know what you think, but I'd say it's a pretty big difference. But all of this work was actually just a precursor to a game mechanic I've been super excited to.
That's exciting. It sounds like all the effort put into the water effects is leading up to something really cool in your game. I can't wait to hear more about this new mechanic you're working on.
Excited to add the oxygen to my dihydrogen.
That's a clever way to express appreciation. Comparing supporters to oxygen is a fun and creative metaphor. It really highlights how essential they are to the project.
See the time I lost?
Ew, what's up, my fam? We just wrapped up our mind-blowing adventure into the biggest lie in video games by ya. And wow, right? From the hilarious stupid unicorn line to the mind-boggling complexities of simulating realistic water effects, we covered it all. I was dead at how they tackled such an epic topic and broke it down with some wild examples. This vid had everything: nostalgia with Wave Race 64, the letdowns of Cyberpunk 2077's water mechanics, and even a little humor sprinkled in with Death Stranding. I mean, can we just give it up for game devs out there? They really know how to make waves literally, so if you got some good laughs and some juicy insights from this roller coaster of a reaction, help your girl Naia out, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and join the squad for more epic vibes. Catch ya in the next one.